Welcome, everyone, to the 59th USPA Masters class. Today's presentation is by Toby Grotz and Dan Rodgers. Professor G's Eclipse Experiments, Ether Theories, and Vedic Science. Today's presentation in 5 years of master classes, 3 special events, and over 80 videos and 30 audios from 41 USPA conferences are all available in the members area. Today's masterclass will be posted tomorrow for members viewing or purchases in the shop. Memberships are $35 a year, $90 per 3 years, active students, military, $20. We have other masterclasses coming up, January 18th, very special one, masterclass number 60, 50th USPA anniversary special, Beverly Coleman, Revisiting the Butterfly Buddha. Don't miss that one. February 15th, another great one, masterclass number 61, Dr. Rick Leskowitz, The Mystery of Life Energy. And today we're announcing a 2025 in-person 50th anniversary conference set for July 17th through 20th at the Holiday Inn in Crystal Lake, Illinois, about 35 miles outside of Chicago. Special thanks to our sponsor today, Etheria and Michael Legger. Please support them. Sponsors can run advertisements or just be recognized for supporting the USPA, a nonprofit 501(c)(3). Dan Rodgers is an electrical engineer with a background in control systems with 37 years experience in the aerospace and defense industry, developing advanced tactical aircraft and mobile ground robotics. He has experience in all facets of flight control systems, design and development, from algorithm design, safety critical hardware and software development to simulation, bench test, and data flight. As a personal curiosity over the past decade, he has studied 19th century and early 20th century inventors such as Nikola Tesla, Victor Schauberger, and natural philosophers such as Walter Russell, who collected and paved the way for advanced electric power and propulsion technologies based on intuitive insights from nature and Vedic tests. Most recently, he has given lectures on ancient axiomatic, quantum, and unified field theory, rediscovered by an Indian naval engineer, Dr. G Srinivasan, who developed the Sankhya Sutras over the past 4 decades to rediscover natural philosophy. Insights dating back to over 32,000 years. This ancient theory and underpinning the Vedas defines nature's wheelworks in terms an engineer can understand, providing a powerful impetus to developing even more ingenious methods for safely hitching our minds and machines to nature's wheelworks. Dan received a BSEE from the University of Austin at Texas in 1987 and an MSEE from Southern Methodist University in 1990. Our other speaker today, Toby Grotz, longtime USPA member, is an electrical engineer with a background in power systems design. During his career, he had 40 years of engineering and management experience at corporations such as Texas Instruments and Martin Marietta. He has worked extensively with nonprofit corporations. Toby has organized and chaired several conferences, including the 1984 Tesla Centennial Symposium. He was first president of the International Tesla Society and chaired the 1986 International Tesla Symposium. In 1987, he worked for Project Tesla with Robert Golka, constructing a 20 million volt Tesla coil at 11,000 feet in Colorado in an attempt to recreate the 1899 Colorado Springs experiment of Nikola Tesla. He also served on the steering committees and helped establish the first international symposium on new energy held in Denver in the spring of 1993 and was chairman of the 1994 International Symposium on New Energy. Toby received his BSE in electrical engineering from the University of Connecticut in 1974. Both these gentlemen share a background in science that is a long time asset of the United States Psychotronics Association, where engineers and lay people meet together to try to incorporate old ideas and new ideas for the future. A disclaimer, USPA, the views expressed are those of the presenters and do not necessarily represent those of the United States Psychotronics Association and its board of directors, officers, or staff. The USPA does not manufacture, sell, or recommend any products, devices, equipment, or services. And now, today's masterclass with Toby Grotz and Dan Rodgers. Toby, hit share.
Got it. Share. Here we go. You see that, Scott?
We're good to go there.
Good to go. Well, everybody, I'm in Wisconsin where it's been down to -10, and Dan's down there in Texas in the Banana Belt. But I was listening to the local community radio station here where we've got a small town of 5,000 people. Got some really bad news today. It seems that Santa Claus was busted by the Border Patrol leaving Chicago, coming to Wisconsin to get his cheese for Christmas. So local sheriff's department said they're going to deputize everybody in the county, and we'll take it from there. So that's the news from Wisconsin. And just wanted to see if that got a little chuckle or not, but that's what I heard on the radio this morning.
I forgot my snare drums in my new setting here, so I'll have that next time you do that.
Okay. Yep. So my association with Paramahamsa Tiwari, supporting his work, making machinery to extract energy from space over many years, led me to get into an email train that he had going with Gopala Srinivasan. And in 2010, I received the email and the attachments that we can post on the USPA website, wherein he did an experiment in order to prove what he thought was the theory of ancient Vedic scholars and the nature of the ether. So he performed that experiment during a total solar eclipse in India on the 15th of January in 2010. The purpose of the experiment was to verify the principles derived in an alternate theory on the structure of the universe, whereby space is identified as a medium with defined properties, whereas in physics, scientists hold the opposite view, that it is vacuous and empty. So the primary focus of the experiment was to test and demonstrate the reactions that are initiated when the balanced state of the medium of space is disturbed. So you can see in this video here, or excuse me, in this graphic, this was the path of the experiment on January 10th, in 2010 on January 15th. It came across India right in here. Are you seeing my mouse?
Yes.
Great. So a little bit of background about Srinivasan. He was profiled in a magazine or a newspaper article called the Indian Express in August 25th, 1987. He had been to the Hanover conference, which was hosted by Dr. Hans Nieper, and I had attended that, and I had met Tiwari there in 1987. I think that was probably the first time I met Tiwari. And during that time, he had been working on a motor or a generator, which produces 1 unit of power with 1/3 of a unit of energy. That was a poster for the Gravity Field Energy Conference. I think that translates in Hanover, Germany in 1987. This is the article from the Indian Express, 1987, where Srinivasan talks about, for the first time I can find in the literature, the term a reactionless generator. We all have books, many of us going back to Faraday's original books on motors and generators. I've got a bookshelf full of motor and generator books, and I've never seen the word reactionless generator anywhere in the standard literature. This article, by the way, if you can see the side here, there's a note on here from Srinivasan to Mr. Walter Rosenthal. Thanks for all your help. I am extremely sorry for the delay in making this copy. Now, Walter Rosenthal was an aerospace engineer, and he worked with John Hutchison and Scott McGee and a number of other free energy inventors. He was a mechanical engineer, but he became very skilled in electrical technology, everything from circuit boards to test instrumentation. So Walt Rosenthal was one of the unknown heroes of the over unity generation scenario that was kind of a background guy, never really did any papers. I think maybe he did a talk one time at a conference about instrumentation, but he was an expert on instrumentation, measuring high frequency to low frequency and DC to light, as we say. So that was my introduction to Srinivasan, was through Tawari, and then that email train led to a attachment in which he did a experiment looking at this eclipse. And what he had was a barrel of water. As you can see here, this is a barrel of water, and in it was a square, like a 2x2. And you can see he had in the background a plastic pipe as a reference point. So at the start of the eclipse, here is the round reference tube, and here is this is the sun, and this is the earth. So that's what he's showing here. This is the picture of what the eclipse looks like, and this is a picture of what the vertical shaft looks like. So as the eclipse starts at 23 minutes into the eclipse, you can see that this moved. Let me back up and say that this was weighted on the bottom with a ring magnet and a ball, so that it can pivot slowly back and forth in the barrel. Actually, I'm not sure he had the ball in his design. You can see as the eclipse begins to ensue, this 2x2 tends to move in this barrel of water until we're 120 minutes into the eclipse and it's cleared the vertical rod. At about 1:22 p.m., the maximum angular phase occurred, but the ring of light was not equal all round, as the location of the place where he did this, which was called Kotagiri, was about 12 degrees north of the path of the totality. The ring was a crescent when the maximum annular phase of the eclipse occurred, and the angle of inclination of the rod had reached about 2 degrees in the direction of the sun-moon position. And that's what he's talking about here in this photograph and in this diagram. All of a sudden, the rod flipped over in a semicircular arc, swayed over to the opposite direction, and settled into the same angle of inclination, about 2 degrees, but away from the direction of the sun-moon position. As the eclipse ensues, you can see what happens to the rod. It starts coming back, starts coming back, starts coming back. 240 minutes into the eclipse, we can see it's just about back to where it was to begin with. So rather hastily, as all this talk about the eclipse was ensuing back in April and back in March, and everybody was going to go down and see the eclipse, and we're like, I don't know if we want to go to the crowds. And so I decided not to. And then I remembered Srinivasan's experiment. So hastily, I must say, we put together an experiment, and we're up here in Wisconsin. Here's Minneapolis. Okay, we're right about up here, 16 miles from the Mississippi River in Vernon County. The town is Viroqua, Wisconsin. And I calculated we were about 700 miles from the path of the eclipse. So I set up a similar experiment in the garage. Here's the barrel of water, and here's the rod in the water. And the rod has a nail in the top of it as an indicator. And here we have a very old, looks like about a 1950s projector, but it works like magic, shining a light on that board in the background, which has quad-ruled paper, so we could really measure it very accurately. This is the detector. And you can see on the bottom, I just put a steel ball, stainless steel ball, which was magnetic, and some rig magnets. And then this ball, when it was standing vertically, was resting on a steel plate in the bottom of the barrel. This was the top of the rod with the nail in it. And this is the size of the rod itself. The threaded rod was let's see, 28.5 inches long. And anybody wanting to know the details can go back and look at this later, and I'll tell you why in a little bit. So this was the setup. We recorded it, of course, with a video camera and started looking for the movement. Before we started, I drew a small line on that backboard around the top of the nail with an indicator, which you can barely see right here. So that was at the start of the eclipse. This is the rod, this is the shadow of the rod. I might say that this is very sensitive. If you put your mouth near it and you breathe, it would swing. So it's an extremely sensitive detector. And at the end of the eclipse, it had moved this far. And interestingly enough, it did not move back. And recently, I've been looking at materials provided by a number of geophysicists and astronomers looking at the core of the Earth and the geophysical changes on the other planets. And it seems the Earth's center of gravity or center of mass has shifted, and there's been a lot of plasma activity. And I started to wonder if during that eclipse, something had moved to the point where it wasn't going to come back because of a change in the Earth. But that's just vague speculation on my part, probably due to the improper execution of the experiment. So like I said, slight movement was detected and never returned to start position. So if we do this again, we look at the orientation of the detector with respect to the path of the eclipse, and India versus the USA. This is what was going on in India as best I can determine. And this is what was going on in the United States as best as I can determine in 2024. So these are viewpoints of orientation with respect to the path of the eclipse. And what we really need to do is get an open-minded astronomer and some volunteers on board, because location considerations for the next replication in 2026, there is going to be an eclipse that's going to run through Spain. So anybody on board for a trip to Spain, let us know. Here is a couple of towns right on the eclipse path line. Perhaps we could have two teams, one being right on the eclipse and one being in proximity to where it would replicate the relationship spatially between where Srinivasan performed his experiment and where the eclipse path goes through in 2026. So I wanted to talk about Tesla's prophecy because the next part of this talk has to do with the first part of this talk, where we discussed the reactionist generator. And you all know that Tesla's prophecy was that ere many generations pass, our machinery will be driven by a power obtainable at any point in the universe. And I started studying the work of Paramahansa Tiwari, whose work was based on ancient Vedic physics as well. And basically what he said, that the properties of space had been postulated by Newton, Descartes, James Maxwell, Sir Oliver Lodge, Albert Einstein, Edward Schrödinger. And Tiwari, in his mathematical dissertation, has proven that space, the vacuum, is non-material, incompressible, non-viscous, continuous, massless, and can possess a steady flow varying from 0 to the speed of light. Thousands of years ago, the ancient sages of India described the nature of space when they said the Akash is not destructible. It is a primordial absolute substratum that creates cosmic matter, and hence it is Paramam Vayam. The Akash is eternally existent, superfluid reality for which creation and destruction are inapplicable. The properties of Akash are not found in matter. Tiwari went on to say that matter is created out of prana, since prana is akash in motion, and akash is the primordial superfluid substratum of the universe, and that is what he and Srinivasan were attempting to engineer in the devices that they were creating. According to space vortex theory, Tewari predicted that galaxies of opposite rotation will attract electrically. Those with similar rotation will repel. And so that's a really interesting take on the electric universe theory, which I've recently, after all these years, finally had a chance to delve into. So we've got ancient wisdom and new science. And there was a guy, he looked at this and he had heard a man speak in New York City in 1884 time frame. And that man said that all perceptible matter comes from a primary substance or tenuity beyond conception, filling all space, the akash or luminiferous ether, which is acted upon by the life-giving prana or creative force, calling into existence in never-ending cycles, all things and phenomena. Nikola Tesla said that in his work, Man's Greatest Achievement. And then he went on to say, ere many generations pass, our machinery will be driven by a power at any point. Okay, so the interesting thing about Tesla's understanding of reality was that he had been to this lecture by Swami Vivekananda. When Vivekananda, who was the first monk to come to the United States to talk about Sanskrit technology, not Sanskrit technology, but Sanskrit wisdom and Hindu teachings, or rather ancient Vedic teachings, Tesla attended his lecture. I have a copy of that lecture. And he got those words from Swami Vivekananda. And I think that Tesla used those words because he had seen this in his vision when he was doing his work inventing. And in particular, when he walked across the park in Budapest, looked into the sunlight and had a vision that allowed him to create the alternating current generator. I believe he saw what he needed Sanskrit to describe. So basically, this is Walter Russell's painting of the wave of creation. And I think that that is an apt picture of the Akash, the substratum of space. As we start to look into this, we see that physicists are starting to recognize that, according to Brian Greene, according to Higgs boson theory, all of space is filled with an invisible substance. So physics is slowly starting to get around to understanding that space isn't empty. But basically,
Toby, can you tell us why physics in the 1880s, 1890s felt like they needed to get rid of ether?
books have been written about that. And I'm not sure why. I'll leave that for the discussion later, and maybe some of the audience can chime into that. One of the things I think was that there's been no way to measure it. We have a very difficult time measuring it. I can use a dowsing rod and get this amazing reaction, but physicists can't tell me what that's about. They can't explain the origins of consciousness. They can't explain the origins of matter. So they invent theories based on suppositions, and somewhere along the line we split and went down the wrong path. But let's talk about that later. And basically, what I'm going to tell the audience is that the second law of thermodynamics, which physicists cling to, must be modified to take into account recent discoveries and to match the data and results demonstrated by many innovators such as Sparky Sweet, Paramahansa Tewari, and Gopala Srinivasan. Tewari's work is very well documented in a film that premiered at the Viennale International Film Festival all back in maybe 2016 or so now. It's called Out of the Void. And the title of that film, which was made in Austria, Out of the Void, was taken from Tewari's work because it's the void that Tewari talks about in his theory. The only place where there is a void is at the center of the electron. And if you haven't seen this film, I'd highly recommend looking at it. It's a two-part film. The first part is a docudrama recreation of work that was going on in the early 20s in Austria by a man who was trying to make a free energy machine, a man named Chapeller. And the second part of the film then switches to India and a physicist in Germany who talk about recent experiments. And in this film, Tewari's machine is documented with witnesses and assistance from engineers from the Nuclear Power Corporation of India, the Karnataka Power Corporation, which runs the entire state, including the city of Bangalore, and myself. I was there at that time. And then later in the film, it switches to a factory where motors and generators have been made by a company called Kirloskar for over 100 years. And the engineers there replicated the machinery of Tewari. And like they said, physicists can think what we want. We've got the data. So I encourage everybody to go to Vimeo and see if they can just buy or rent. I think it costs $3 or $4 to rent it, and they'd get a good taste of what a working free energy device looks like. Thousands of watts of output power. So the charge impulse motor of the Srinivasans produces 3 times more power than what it utilizes because unlike a conventional motor, it does not need an inductive or magnetic field to produce torque. The motor is so designed that it does not generate back electromagnetic force. And the principle of operation is based on the phenomenon that when a high-density electric charge or current is expanded, the charge potential drops and there is an increase in velocity, imparting impulse, momentum, or thrust. And that was from that Indian Express interview from August 25th, 1987. This is a diagram of that fuel-free generator. And I picked up the word FFG, fuel-free generator, from the newer generation, the 20, 30-something kids that are starting to look into this stuff and starting to build free energy equipment. This particular machine has neodymium magnets plus coils around cores that form 20 sets. Only 4 of them are shown here in the diagram. And it's got 5 sets of 12-volt batteries charging the load. One 12-volt battery is charged by inductive kickback and drives an inverter at 230 volts, and a small rotary transformer sets the voltage at 60 to provide 12 volts for optic trigger plus 48 volts to charging bank. An IGBT, which you see down here, triggers coils for 1 nanosecond to reverse coil magnetic polarity. A slotted disc triggers an optic switch to drive the IGBT. The rotor axle pulley drives external alternator generator to drive external loads at designed RPM. It runs on the faux principle, PHO, perpetually by its self-generated potential. It exchanges simultaneous potential with sequential harmonics in each cycle. That's his description of it. The PO is a perpetual harmonic oscillator, PHO, perpetual harmonic oscillator. This is what the device looked like based on the diagram I just showed you. And this will be an attempt to show you what the machine looks like when it was running. So I've got to bring up a video here. And I've got to switch to my QuickTime player and share it. Are we seeing that, guys? Did I lose you?
No, you can press play. We're good.
Okay. So this is the video that Srinivasan took. It's very poor quality, but he was demonstrating this motor. Okay, that was the demonstration of the motor. And now we'll get back to the presentation. And I'd like to put all these files up there on the website, Scott, when we're done. There's a lot of them that came with the Dan. Actually, Dan shared with me, and actually, I have another friend from India that knew Srinivasan and talked to him. Had a lot of these files as well. Um, so this is the perpetual harmonic oscillatory principle, the faux principle, the permanent and fundamental basis for the entire range of dynamic states existing in nature eternally. The derivation of the Poe state combines the Fermi and Bose fields into a perpetual harmonic oscillatory multiplet as a real foundation. It overcomes the relativistic limitations by creating all manifestation as a hologram on a dynamic substratum sustained at an exact and constant cycle rate. And that's why I wanted to have Dan come into this talk today, because he's a guy that has spent so much time trying to understand and deciphering this. I want to give a shout out to Jeane Manning, because the documents I'm about to show you came from her very recently, and she was cleaning out her files and found that she had a copy from 2010 of a description and diagrams of the machine that came from a man named Roy L. Turner, who oh 07 area code is in England. And there are 5 pages of the plans and the drawings. I emailed that and it came back as a negative. So from the looks of the handwriting, I would say probably Roy may no longer be with us, but perhaps somebody in the audience knows of him, and perhaps Jeane Manning can give us more information on who Roy was at a later date. So this is a diagram of the magnets. I'm not going to spend a lot of time going into this. I think you got a pretty good visual from basically what you saw, where the solenoids are and where the magnets are, and the construction of the solenoids and the magnets. Like I said, all these files will be up on the USP website, USPA website. And I think we really need a design team, perhaps sit down at the conference in July and maybe go through this and see what we can do to figure out how to put one of these things together and test it. More diagrams that show the timing and relationship of the magnets with the coils, and that's very important. Switching properties. More diagrams. There's the metal spacer. This would be a vertical view looking at the shaft, side view looking at the shaft, the coils with the cores here. And this is what I'm planning, Scott, that the Srinivasan documents will be located here. This is a USPA library for members, and it's got a lot of good documents in there. So I'd encourage everybody, if you're not a member of the USPA, to join up so you can get access to documents like this. This was one of Srinivasan's set of test equipment when he was working on these motors. Hey, look, that one played inside the PowerPoint. All right.
Sweet.
Great. I was wondering how to do that. So one of the things that he talks about, and there's a document called lenslaw.pdf, and this document is very interesting. Basically, when you download this document, you can see a description of how to make a device with water. This is filled with water, and this is a hand pump, and this is a pressure gauge. I won't bore you with the details of reading this, but basically, Srinivasan came up with a way with this device to demonstrate the properties of space, I believe, and I can let Dan comment more upon that if he has time. But this is something I'd like to build, perhaps as a demonstration. I don't know if one has ever been built before. And Srinivasan, by the way, saw a similarity to Bill Mueller's device. And Carmen Mueller is actively promoting that device now, all these many years later. That's his daughter. And his comment, Srinivasan's commentary on the Mueller device was, his findings are particularly significant because even today, physicists have not been able to derive a justifiable principle to accommodate the principle over unity behavior. And, this kind of spurs my interest in looking at Bill's device again. Srinivasan saw merit in it. I think it's definitely, we need to all take a look at that again. So Shout out to Gene Manning. If you want to know more about what's going on, who the inventors are, over all the many years in this over unity research, the book Hidden Energy is an excellent reference book. And at genemanning.com, you'll find that book. Chapter 9 is about Tewari and the reactionless generator and how that was built and tested over unity. And then this book was written by Charlie Bensinger, who was on the film crew that made the film The Zenith Factor when they filmed the 1984 Tesla Centennial Symposium and interviewed Tom Bearden and Elizabeth Rauscher and Mark Seifer, and made a documentary about that 84 Tesla Centennial Symposium called Zenith Factor once again. And so Charles wrote a fiction book on the free energy scenario that we're all been exploring since the days of Keeley. And the interesting part of this book is that if you read it, you'll find yourself in it because we're all part of this book. This book is a story about a third generation alien half-breed, triple breed that was working as an electrical engineer at Area 51 and gets tired of it and escapes and joins the environmental movement to teach them about free energy and anti-gravity. And in that book, he weaves in all the characters we know so well, like Tom Bearden and Sparky Sweet. And like I say, is a part of all of us in this book. So it's a real good, it's a short read. It's a good novel. I was very taken by this book. And the reason Charlie wrote it was to try and let the environmental movement know that there's an answer to the problem they're working on, and we've got it. But they have refused to look at it up until this point because they're captivated by the physicist mind virus. So that's the end of the show. And it says if I click, I can exit. And there I am. And I was really excited to do this presentation because I wanted to learn more about Srinivasan's work, and that's why I'm here, is to listen to the next speaker, Dan Rodgers.
Ready? You want me to switch?
Yep, you can share and
Okay.
get going.
Can you see that?
Awesome.
Well, thanks for the USPA and Toby for inviting me, bringing me into the fold, and so it's a real honor. And this presentation is a part of something I presented at the Dharma conference last August in India. I was invited there, and I think it was the American engineers' perspective on this this science called Sankhya. And G Srinivasan wrote a 2-volume set that really dives deep into the actual transliteration of the ancient texts. He took him about 40 years to kind of work all the way through this. And so what we're going to do today is go over a deck that just introduces you to this body of knowledge. There's a companion paper that goes with it that will point to all the individual documents kind of in a curated fashion with excerpts from G's writings that will kind of give you a flow. And so if you want to really dive deep, then you would go to that third layer and start digging into G's actual documents and the physics of it. So the outline for this talk, and there's going to be a lot of words that come up, and I really don't want you to try to read them all. I'm going to comment on each chart, and hopefully this will be made or can be made available along with the paper, so you'll have time to digest it. For now, I think what we really want to do is just take you to this doorway, and I call it Doorway to Freedom, and I'll tell you why that's important. And what we're going to go over is this rediscovered natural philosophy that's ancient, antediluvian, before the Great Flood, before the resurrection of civilization. It's extremely insightful from a natural philosophy standpoint. I'll show you how influential it has been on modern science and thinkers, starting with Pythagoras. And once you understand the root and the physics of nature's wheel work, it's very powerful in terms of hitching minds, consciousness, and our machinery to nature's wheel work. And then I'll talk about the pathway to freedom, which is really the pointers to G's papers, but it's also tied to a concept that the nation of India, which they call themselves Bharat, which means devoted to truth. And so embedded in their whole culture is bringing out this truth based on natural law and then living correctly based on it. So it's a pretty powerful and aligns very well with the kind of the American uh, dream. So why is it doorway to freedom? And so there's a sentence right at the beginning of our Declaration of Independence that I'm not sure people kind of see as an imperative or really understand the implications of the underlying words there. So, and the imperative is to assume among the powers of the earth the separate and equal station to which the laws of nature and nature's God entitle them. So a lot of people may not think too deeply about the powers of the earth. We can talk about two categories, one being kind of the cataclysmic events that reset civilization, or we could think of it in terms of the power structures, the way people organize themselves, and what we call civilization. And the key for an individual is to understand that because of the laws of nature and nature's God, they each have the separate and equal station. And these words come from Thomas Jefferson. And so what does that mean, separate and equal station? So the first thing is to understand the laws of nature, and then to put that together with mankind, mankind meaning thinker, can directly plug into that. And with that kind of knowledge, with that kind of abundant power, can compete with the other powers of the earth, or get off the rock in case of a cataclysm and then survive. And so what we're seeing is that that the American kind of mission or imperative is tied to this Sanatana Dharma philosophy. And you can see here in these 1 through 5 um, that you're really talking about what does the pursuit of happiness look like? And this is from a Sanatana Dharma perspective, is, eternal existence, divine wisdom, all-pervading bliss, happiness, absolute independence from all bondage, and then suzerainty or sovereignty over the whole universe. So if everybody were to achieve this goal and were successful, you really can't think through that. But in the end, what it means is that that you serve your fellow man and you respect nature is kind of where you get to for this to work. And so this theme runs through India and their teachings, and as we see with the science, it's at least 32,000 years old. So in some ways, this is, at least in my opinion, one of the greatest stories ever told when you get through it. So this deck here will be setting the stage. We'll give a couple examples of the physics, but it's mainly just to give you context of the importance of all this. And so the Vedas and Vedic texts, where Sankhya is the science behind all the Vedas, is to allow people to set goals of the highest order of development appropriate to their, individual desires and needs. So that's very, very American. So from a context of how to frame this, we can use Swami Vivekananda's words. And so the question is practically this, what is the universe? From what does it arise? Into what does it go? And the answer is, in freedom it rises, in freedom it rests, and in freedom melts away. So that's kind of vague, but when you really start peeling back the onion on freedom, in one case, it's asymptotic freedom from a tensor-based physical balance point of view, where there's no obstructions. It's perfectly harmonious. Or it could be from an individual person standpoint, liberty as we know it. So my question was, and the reason I kind of dived into this over the last 10 years, is that is there a natural law that we can get down to some actionable answers that, engineers can understand? And that's really kind of what drove my pursuit. And if you quote G, he's quite a character. And so he says, no engineer would have ceded the present theories in physics because he was forced to make his theories into predictable realities. And so he's really kind of poking a finger at the ivory tower physicist. And G is he was a naval engineer. He's an engineer at heart who just very curious mind. And so you'll kind of get the idea that everything he thinks about, and that's maybe why it resonated with me, is from an engineer, practical standpoint. And so we knew that back in the 90s, and this really is the article Toby wrote, one of the first things I came across that made me aware of Toby's work, is that Swami Vivekananda and Tesla had a mind meld. And when they talked about ideas, there's a lot of resonance between, the Indian philosophies that Swami was bringing up, and then Tesla's inherent kind of intuitive sense of how nature worked. And that's why I use the word wheel work of nature, kind of quoting Tesla, because I think that really gets to the heart of it. What is the basic, where does nature get its power from? What are the basic source of dynamism in the universe? And then if you take that freedom answer and break it down a little more into something concrete, Tesla's quoting here, he's saying long ago, which was much longer than anybody anticipated, that we recognized that space was not empty, that it was full of this creative force where the primary substance was thrown into infinitesimal worlds, vortex. Think about Walter Russell. Prodigious velocity that became gross matter, the force subsiding, the motion ceases and disappears, reverting back to the primary substance. So this is Tesla's words of the same answer to Swami Vivekananda's answer for what is the universe and how does it work. And then more recently, one of the speakers, I think one of the final Tom Bearden presentations was on extracting energy from the vacuum, his 900-page tome on that. And he's saying here is that, you can extract energy right from the substratum or nature. So there's different approaches to this. You could use, cold fusion. You could use traditional fission and fusion, nuclear kind of reactions. You can also use magnetic fields, or you can do some things with capacitors. There's a lot of way to interface to this, the vapor technologies. And so all those are getting at how to interface with the vacuum. So what was missing was a complete theory that was completely axiomatic and covered the whole spectrum of what's observable, but also covered what's not observable. And it ended up being a holistic holographic theory. And that's what G produced or documented, and that's what's so valuable. So the theory basically, Maharishi Kapila, back in the day, and we're talking 32,000 years ago or so, he came up with a single logical law that integrates space and time, meaning there's one fundamental equation that nature uses over and over again. And we'll describe that briefly later. But it's really just a cubic form of a vibrating mass. What he calls the perpetual harmonic oscillator is the fundamental engine, and that there's an entire matrix of these cubes that form together, and that everything that we see and do are waveforms that have mass-like properties, charge-like properties, and so on, and that all the entire set of universal parameters can be accurately derived with this science. And that's what I spent a lot of time on, is understanding what G wrote down and convincing myself that I understood it well enough that I think he's right. So this was called Dharma. And so Dharma means different things today, but back in the day, it's the fundamental axiomatic science that was practiced holistically and ritually. And so some people took that as a religious equation, but what it was is just an elite concept of practicing axiomatic laws called Dharma. And that was at the base of the Vedas that then led to the yogas. And so this was a time before the reductionist science, but not only that, the split between religion and science, when it was just a pure natural philosophy. This is how nature works, and this is how you should carry yourself and operate in that context. And there's this three axiomatic forces, the gunas, what they call them, which is the stress. And so there's a compression, a shuttling force, and then an expansion. And that same interaction is what drives all of nature. So you might ask, what drove G to kind of figure this out? And so he was looking at the Rig Veda, and he noticed that the first sloka, or truth axiom in there, was an energy extraction principle. And that he kind of pulled the thread on, and over 4 decades, determined that this is where the source of coherent energy in space is. And then he fully explains it, and can derive all of the physical constants and parameters, both the ones we can measure and ones that science has yet to determine. So the trick is that a lot of the Vedic texts were translated assuming an anthropomorphic kind of perception on it. They didn't realize it was a science text. And so dukkha, for example, was considered as pain, as feeling, and human feeling, when really it was a vector tensor state. And so he started getting clues and following that thread of logic, and then he was able to determine that all the constant in physics were derivable from a single axiom, starting with 1 + 1 = 2, and that, science would drool over having an axiomatic base for science, where you don't start in the middle and then go to the micro and then also the macro, as this starts from a logical 1 + 1 = 2 and then builds up from there, all of phenomena. So how, Sanskrit means equalized, and sama means equalized, krit means cut. So the actual word Sanskrit it means a code. And so it was encoded with a number system. And so it used the human body's ability to make sounds. And this matrix here gives you the decoder ring between the sounds and the numbers. And if you look at the Rig Veda, the first sloka, it basically translates into, by triggering the expansive qualities of the fundamental substratum, abundant free energy can be obtained. So there's 4 Vedas, main Vedas, the Rig Veda being the first. So the first sloka, the first Veda, starts out with this. And what you see here is a number, very large number. And basically you take the cube root of that and you get the speed of light. And so it's in yards instead of meters. But it's the expansion rate of light, a qubit in a 3D world. And so he continued on the decoding of not only the Rig Vedas, but also the 68 axioms that make up the Sankhya science. And the Sankhya is Sankhya Karika, and Karika means verse. So all of this was kind of not poems, but you would kind of sing these phrases, and then by the intonation taken all together, they could decode this. And so if you look at the other 9, there's 9 main ones that are expanded, but you start getting into the idea of consciousness and exactly how the process works. And what's interesting, if you look at the 9th one here, that's really saying that for mankind to pursue and assume their equal station, they have to follow these slokas here and understand the meaning of them if they want to really tap into the knowledge and the power of the universe. And they're saying right here that, you guys, this is the path forward right here. And so embedded in their so because of the consciousness and because of the nature's wheel work, you might be able to say the OG of psychotronics was Sankhya. It fits very well, but it does bridge, between the science and the mind, the consciousness and technology. And so I think the Psychotronics Association mission statement would align very well with Sankhya. So when we talked about long ago, what we're talking about is 32,000 years, and I'm not going to go over too much detail here, but if you look over here in the so-called modern times, we need to step back and recalibrate what we think mankind is, how long we've been around, and how sophisticated we've been. What's really been happening is we've been resurrecting in this time frame here from knowledge that was much greater way back here. And the short story is that based on certain constellations, the Vedic texts and some of the sightings that are mentioned in there, the last time it happened was about 6,000 years ago. But we know mankind was not that sophisticated then. And so the next time that happens, you have to go another great year back. And so that's how you get to the 32,000 years. And there's one of the great freedom fighters, polymaths in India was Lokmaya Tilak, and he wrote 2 books that explains it in detail. And in the paper that G wrote, he also pulls out the essential pieces of this. So if you want to know more, you can go into this. So this is how they get to the 32,000 years ago. But at this time, you're talking about a mild climate at the polar regions. And so it was a different world. It wasn't, it was pre-flood. So we talked about that how do you get this type of knowledge, which, you know, even our most accomplished physicists today can't even derive. And so they did it through the oral tradition and that encoding that we talked about. And so it survived the great cataclysm and the floods and the pre-glacial times, and it's embedded in their documents that starting with here at the bottom, Sankhya, with these 3 forces, the compression, the expansion, and the shuttling in a continuous process called Dharma, is the basis of the Vedas. And you can think of this as the physics, and this as kind of the applied physics or engineering in the Vedas. And you see a similar pattern of 4. And then above that, you get to the yoga, which is the yoking of the mind and the body to nature's wheel work. So this is through resonance, and that's what the yogas really are. And so this is kind of their body of knowledge. And what G is saying is that this is all about the same time frame, and the originals were all done at the same time, which means it was all done about 32,000 years ago. So if you take a Veda, for example, Vedic math, and you really dive in deep, this is another freedom fighter in polymath in India, and he decoded the Vedas that derives all the math. So if you look at Vedic math, there's 16 sutras right here that basically cover all the different mathematics that we teach: algebra, geometry, astronomy, calculus, etc. And able to do it all mentally. So they didn't have calculators, they didn't have computers. And so very sophisticated math could be done, predicting planets and so on, health and ballistics, all kinds of things could be done, harmonic oscillation, all done with Vedic math. And so it wasn't obvious until he spent about 8 years in the woods and meditated on it, that's what this text was saying. So we kind of have to be careful when we look at the old texts and how we interpret them. So, and that kind of sets the stage for why it's natural that all these people that we show here were drawn to and influenced by these Vedic texts. And so you can start with Pythagoras, where all is number, and he taught Plato, and then you have the Newtons and the Teslas and the Schaubergers, who actually built machines. And then you have, of course, all the modern quantum physicists there, and they all have read and familiar with, and they were drawn to, I think, naturally, just the truth of it. And now that G has really written this down in those 2-volume sets, you can take a lot of the fuzz and make it much more clear of what these guys were after. And I think G has found it. And so I think we're on a kind of a new era once this information gets out. And so the document he wrote was Secret of Sankhya, Acme of Scientific Unification. And there's 2 volumes. There's a part 1 and part 2. Part 1 is not a transliteration. It doesn't have the Sanskrit in it. It's just a pure kind of physics, engineering laydown of the science. And then the second volume actually decodes all 68 axioms and gives an explanation. It goes from the Sanskrit to the interpretation to the explanation. And Sankhya means the logic of counting. So it's a axiomatic quantum unified field theory. And it starts with 1 + 1 = 2, literally. And then it really does cover the entire gamut of phenomena in the universe. And people asked about the Michelson-Morley and why we went away from the ether. And so all those stories, special relativity, general relativity, string theory, G talks about them. So when you read the paper, it'll point to the section where G talks about it. So the paper is kind of your compass for navigating all of G's work. So now we're going to talk a little bit about what you'll find when you read in there. And so what is the vacuum of space? And of course, if you know what it is and tap it, then the energy and the consciousness and the propulsion all comes as a result. And so what it really is a holodeck of these perpetually oscillating 3D voxels. So you're probably familiar with a pixel in 2D. A voxel is just a 3D cube, and basically saying that space is made up of these voxels. And so here we have, and it's key that there's only this one interaction is the single interaction that all of the science is built off of. And so you have a compression phase, simultaneous, you have a resonant rebounding, and then you have a sequential expansion. And so most science, most sensors that we have only deal with the sequential expansion piece, and they cannot measure resonance that's and the coherence of a resonant or a simultaneous one, because there's no change, and our sensors, including the human body, is only measuring change. So you have to use logic to figure this out, and that's what Maharishi Kapila ansatz was. He really figured that out. And so to give the analogies between modern physics and Sankhya, as we talk about the ether or the quantum vacuum, and then in Sankhya, it's the substratum, and there's specific characteristics: coherent, dynamic, perpetual, and unmanifest. And this is space, and this is the vacuum of space. So they call it substratum. And what that's made of, in terms of the 0-point energy, is these perpetual harmonic oscillators. And this is where the dynamism, the inherent dynamism of nature, and this is where all the power comes from. And what we talk about, mass or charge and different forces, are all tied to different combinations of simultaneous and sequential versions of the waveforms from these harmonic oscillators. And so at the macro level, the highest level, we have singularity, what we call black holes over here. Purusha is what it's called in the Sankhya science. And it's kind of the ground state. And it's the large incoherent unit of cyclic time period, or the maximum inertial mass. But the trick is that any point in space can have the entire rest of the universe act on it. And so any point can act like a black hole. In fact, there's basically a black hole, every atom, everything runs on this. And this is really a polarization of the substratum. At the smallest, the opposite end, the smallest levels, we have the Mula Prakriti, which is the root oscillatory coherent state. And this is equivalent to what we'll call the cosmological constant in modern physics terminology, string theory, the infinitesimal, which is what brought a lot of the special relativity down, dividing by 0. Well, there's actually a limit, a minimum limit on that, and it's this right here. And what's interesting is that at this level, and you would expect it if you logically thought about a unified field theory, is that dimensions of length, time, charge, and mass all equal 1 at this level. And so from there, you build up all the different physics. And so I want to give one example just to kind of give you an idea of the kind of the power of the physics. So, today we empirically adopt this standard for the speed of light, something called meters and something called a second. And we know it's not constant there, but we treat it as constant. I think they use the cesium atom to kind of take it out of the measured world and into something that is constant, which is tied to the cesium atom. But Sankhya does an axiomatic derive. So just based on starting with 1 + 1 = 2 derives the speed of light, what we call the speed of light. And you can see there's two components. There's a fixed component here, and then a variable component here tied to a ratio of the distance of the source to where you're measuring it. So this fixed one in the exponent, you have a third order of the golden ratio there, and there's a reason for that. And then there's over here, you have another exponent that's the radius of the sun over the distance from the sun to the earth. And so this constant here is a true constant. It's fixed, and it really ties to the harmonic oscillator rate, the natural rates. This you can think of as kind of the carrier wave of the background of the universe. And then this light from a source like the sun is an order above that. And what's interesting is that the golden ratio solves this equation here, and it's the only number that does. And so your 1/x is your simultaneous change ratio is equal to your sequential change increment. So, in our one equation up here, it always has to balance. So the background of space is always balanced, but it's energetic, very energetic, and it's very dense, actually. And it's the waveforms on top of that we call matter. And so when you polarize this background state, for example, a sun, polarize it, and then you have radiation, then you get the observable light. So C right here is the background carrier wave, call it, of the substratum. That's the energy. And then the radiation on top of that, when it gets to a level of 10 to the first above it, will pop out, radiate outside the boundary that's perfectly balanced. But then when it gets above this ratio of 10 to the first times greater, then it decays relative to that. So it's not constant. So depending on where you measure light, the speed is different. And you can think of it as this kind of a vortex here, like if you were to blow a smoke ring or the rings here with the dolphins. It's what you're seeing as light is just an expansion of space in a toroidal form that has a net positive velocity, and that's what light is. So what that means is that depending on which planet you measure it, your speed of light, it's going to change. And this is where the Michelson-Morley experiment was faulty, in that it was riding on the same thing it was trying to measure, so it always got the same answer. So relative to the Earth, we get the speed of light is 1. As you get closer to the sun, it's above 1, and past it, going farther out, like on Mars, it's less than 1. So we say the speed of light is less than 1, but what we really say is that that the planets are expanding, right? So if you're right in the middle of two sources of light, it'll look like the same speed. But if you're closer to one source than another, then there's a blue shift of the nearer one. So it looks like light's faster than the light coming from this other star. And the Big Bang Theory says that it's because this farther star is moving away, because the assumption is that the speed of light is constant. But if the reality is that light decays as you get farther from the source, then this sun isn't expanding. The universe is not expanding. It's just a greater decay. And so these are the kinds of fundamental errors in logic that science and physics have that they need to break out of. So what's the benefit of breaking out? What's the benefit of exposing 2/3 of the phenomena hidden from human understanding? And that's really to motivate humanity to correct its focus and gain the maximum advantage that the substantial continuum of space can offer. So over unity, levitation, anti-gravity, which is creating a bubble in space that's different than the one the planet created, and including the consciousness piece, the extrasensory perception, genetics, astrology. There's a lot of other things. And so you're really opening the door to kind of infinite freedom and unlimited exploration of the cosmic scene. And this is the kind of freedom that Swami Vivekananda was talking about. So there's this opportunity that we have to harmonize with nature and get the information. You know, if you have a weaver bird that knows how to make a nest that can stand up to 60-mile-an-hour wind, you know, he didn't go to physics or college to learn that. It's just inherent. So where did that information come from? So understanding where knowledge comes from and being able to tap it along with the abundant power is a big opportunity for mankind. So there's a paper here. There's a term for it in the Indian language, but basically the Sankhya is the way forward to harmonizing with nature and kind of gainfully attain this ultimate state of resource, you know, and harmonious living and freedom and comfort. So there's a lot that can be gained from that. And so it's an open challenge. And the way G states it is that, you know, one can understand Sankhya easily, but even a child can, but an adult would have to give up his preconceived notions first. So we've been taught in schools from day one of how the world works, but we know there's conundrums in physics. We know that we don't have all the answers. And I think G decoding these ancient texts, those ancients knew the answer. And so India is one of the places where this originated, and the name of their country, Bharat, is really devoted to truth. And the truth is understanding these natural law, and then and that's the Sankhya part, and then how to put those to good use to live well. That's the Veda part and the yoga part of it. And so it's their mission to know the laws of nature and follow those laws of nature. And it's their mission as a country, and they're getting back to their original identity. There's 1,500 years they were occupied. And so, but they had the original knowledge. And when I was over there, it's part of the curriculum now, the Sankhya science, to required reading. And so there had a whole national effort to bring this back. And so we'll end on this slide, but there's a lot of questions you can ask. So if the Sankhya has existed for 32,000 years, if it really is a axiomatic unified field theory, then how advanced were prior civilizations, and what natural events disrupted or reset them, these civilizations, and how did the ancient knowledge survive prior to cataclysms, and more importantly, how do we ensure that this knowledge isn't lost for millennia again? And how will current science, physics, medicine, engineering, general well-being be different going forward once we know that? And then we get back to the question is, how do we learn, how do we teach people in America and all over the world to assume among the powers of the earth are separate and equal stations to which the laws of nature entitle us? And so that's really the kind of the story I wanted to set the stage on. And in a follow-up meeting, we can go into the science more. And I've worked a lot on how to explain that to where people, engineers, even high school, middle schoolers can understand it. And so I'm looking to do a combination of videos and maybe a series of books to make it more easily digestible to people that we want to teach. And of course, start building some of these machines and tapping into it. And then really, I think you can treat this like a Göbekli Tepe, where it's an archaeological find, right? And we don't know all the answers yet. And people could spend a lot of time drilling down on any one of these aspects, not just engineering and science, but the consciousness piece, um, and the Vedas, the amount of information about well-being, healthcare, all types of things. And so I think there's a big opportunity for us going forward. So we'll stop there.
Fantastic, Dan.
I think we're on time. I don't know.
Yeah, we're doing
Okay.
good. We now just need some questions. I think a lot of this is filled us up, but we'll see what Toby, you have some comments you want to make, and then we can see if we have any questions from the audience, or you want to open up some conversations.
I'd just like to thank Dan for the work he's done over all these years. It's fantastic. And, uh, when I first saw that Göbekli Tepe that's profiled in that Netflix series, Ancient Apocalypse, I was stunned by, basically the wisdom, the knowledge that these ancient pre-flood civilizations must have had. So I'm just ready to hear the questions.
Question, will it be an AI versus natural or nature future? Is the
Yeah.
question.
Yeah,
Yeah.
go ahead,
Go
Dan.
ahead, Toby.
Well, my take on AI is it's a one-dimensional. It exists in one dimension, and it's a useful tool, but basically the vast possibilities that Dan talks about, where we can go with our wisdom and our minds and our knowledge, you don't need AI.
Yeah, I've actually spent a lot of time on it. My background is in robotics and automation of aircraft and tanks and things like that. And so there's a tremendous wave that's going to change due to AI right now. And there's recent videos. So there's a lot of billionaires, ex financial tech guys that are starting to run the country now and helping out. These guys are smart, powerful guys, and a lot of them own stock in AI companies. And so AI, you're going to see come on, but AI is an amplifier, and it only knows what people put into it. So for those kind of scenarios, that you want to get answers quicker to things that are known, AI can work for you. And it's like anything, a gun. It could be, used for good, used for bad. And so you really have to be careful. And so the power I call it the restore the balance of power, is that we need to manage life without AI better, and then get our game up. AI will come, and then we just need to be able to manage the issues that are associated with AI even more. And so the AI spectrum is, there's artificial intelligence, artificial general intelligence, which means comparable to a human, meaning you don't know if you're talking to a computer or a human. And then there's something called artificial superintelligence, where the machine is smarter than the people and the machines take over. And so we're at right now today the artificial general intelligence level. And so we're right on the brink, and things will change very fast in the next few months, and then going on to the few years. But some of these tech guys have read all the philosophy, and there's actually a program, I mean, an effort in institutes being created to make AI safe, but also to make philosopher creators, coders, actually. And so it's the kind of condition where you just have to be really savvy and really smart. And for me, the Sankhya science and the Sanatana Dharma, and the imperative for America is the balance. That's the way you get it, is you make people savvy on the laws of nature and what it means to live well and live right. And I think the answer is there, but game on. You have to really pick your game up, I think.
Yeah, I remember now. We asked AI program, Google LM or something, to analyze its Huawei patent application, and it produced a 10-minute podcast. It was stunning. It was amazing what AI did with that Tuari patent application. But and I've got that available. We can send that to the members. So it had some good points. But we really need a platform, maybe an invitation-only platform. If we fed Harold Aspen's book in there on modern ether theory and all the other books that we have by Wesley and Marinoff and Bearden, and we took all the information that we have in our libraries and fed it into the AI platform, then we could work with it. Because right now, AI will always come back and tell you that you can't have a perpetual motion or a perpetual harmonic oscillator because AI is looking at all the information that exists, and most of the information that exists that he has access to is all this crap that's put out by the physicists. So AI right now needs to be educated if we're able to, if in order to use it as a tool, it needs to know a lot more than it does right now.
And one of my concerns is that what G wrote it is the answer. Once those AI guys figure out that that's the answer, they're going to be able to develop new materials. They're gonna start folding, genes. And again, it comes down to it's just an amplifier of what you know. And so if some people are good, some people are bad, and you have to prepare for the fact that it will find it out, and you need people in the loop managing the whole thing. And if we create AI, then we're responsible for it. But I think it's going to know the real answer. And those, like Toby just said, it'll give you the wrong answer now because the wrong knowledge is out there. But what I'm bringing to the table, what G did and what distinction science does, is kind of explain the kind of power that you're dealing with and whether you believe in Atlantis or not, and ability, the big uh, laser wars, that they talk about in the Vedic texts. Those are probably more real than anybody really believes. And Combe Carpenter, the one who invited me to the Dharma conference, knows this better than most. And so you just have to be prepared. And the people who these billionaires working in government also work in DOD now. And so these are very smart, capable people, but we need the average person to understand this because we can't rely on just a few. So it just, yeah, tighten down your chin straps for sure on this one.
Okay, question from Shri Gupta. I could not understand the relationship of the three gurus to scientific principle.
Yeah, so it's guna, and it means
No,
stress.
sorry. Yeah.
Gunas, yeah, gunas, and so that those literally are stresses. So the basic interaction that nature uses over and over again is this combination. So what, if you ask yourself what physics is, what is matter? And so Newton talked about different things coming together, but you have to define what an interaction is to understand a force or a charge or a mass. And so that the three gunas are the interaction, and they all happen at the same time. And so when you talk about mass to charge, then the mass would be associated with the compressive force, and the charge is the resonant force. And then if you have radiation like light, then that's the expansion force. And so the perpetual harmonic oscillator is an oscillator that's in this compressive mode that's coherent, and then there's this resonant field around it, what we call, the electron cloud. They're really not electron clouds, but then they're quantized in there, and that's the expansive force. And so no matter whether you're talking about an atom or a planet, and you look at the kinetic equation of the angular momentum at the edge of whatever that body is balanced with the space around it, c, but it uses angular momentum. And then at the center of it is the coherent mass-like, where you have coherent just means that all the items are the same phase, same rate. And so you have inertial properties associated with that because the space acting at that point has a center of action where everything's working the same, center of mass. And then beyond that, you have the reaction to the polarization, the compression of space there. You have a reaction or a bubble, and we call that charge or radiation.
So when I looked at those first two gunas, um, the compression and expansion, it's kind of like the frequency of an object or the vibrational rate that we tune in radionics and psychotronics and as we talked about the other day, the ability of one object to be able to connect with another object at any distance based on these internal codes that everything has.
Yeah, so when Tesla says that everything's frequency and vibration, then this is what he's getting at. And so if you look at the permeability of free space, if you take speed of light 10 to the 8th kind of power, the 10 to the 5th is kind of your permeability piece, and your permeativity is the 10 to the 3rd. That's the sequential piece, and the permeability is the simultaneous piece. And together, they have to equal the speed of light. And so that's why you get, mu naught epsilon naught square root is the speed of light, because that's the interaction. So that's why you kind of have to read G's paper to understand it. I'm probably not doing a very good job, but that's the logic. We have to shed the dogma, and we have to get into this mode of understanding what those gunas are, and then know how in different instances they manifest as either magnetic field or neutrino or light or a force, which is just a field. So one of the problems with physics is they never define the field. Well, this science defines the field, and everything we see is a function of imbalances or divergence and curl in the field, all the waveforms that we see. So for electrical engineers, somebody understands a nomograph, for example, you could see where all the kinetic and the potential capacitors and inductors, why there's resonance there at that point. And every one of them has to equal C, the balance. So that's why a nomograph works and why it's a log scale, for example.
Awesome. Awesome. How would Dr. G's eclipse experiment relate to the alias effect?
Yeah, I just responded to that text, and I had somewhere in my files, I've stored away information in my Srinivasan files about that effect. And all I can answer to that person is that we need to.
It's our friend Tom Brown.
Oh, yeah.
He's here from Bali.
Yeah. No, I needed to look into that more. I started to look into it and got sidetracked, but and there are some researchers, I think, in Europe, they were doing some experiments with pendulums during the eclipse. So I need to look back into that and see what they found out.
Okay. And maybe Tom, when you and Toby get together, we can have another master class and hit upon that again. All right. And Dan Taylor, one of our board members, is here. I made you a co-host. If you can chime in with any questions that you see, we're starting to pile up more questions than we'll be able to handle in the next 30 minutes. But or Toby, if you see something that you can take on or you think Dan can take on,
Well,
I got to bring the questions up.
yeah, over in the chat.
Yeah. I see a Marianne Beckman
Okay.
that is inviting Dan to come talk. She's into understanding ADD, ADHD,
Hmm.
osteoporosis, schizophrenia, and wants to invite you to talk at the Vedic camps at the Hindu Temple in Lamont, Illinois, or talk at the annual Vivekananda conference. Where is the annual Vivekananda conference?
I'll unmute. It's in Lamont, Illinois, just maybe 45 minutes north, or I should say southwest of O'Hare. So if you're coming from the Minnesota part, you may have a little bit of a drive, but every January. And this is exactly what I'm trying to bring to the temple. And they have a wonderful Vedic camp over the summer where we have all volunteers that come and teach these high school children. And, you know, some of these experiments, this is a perfect opportunity to, you know, get involved and, you know, make the link, because a lot of their parents are engineers and in the healthcare field. And bless these parents who are trying to instill some of this Vedic wisdom in the children. But we need what you're talking about because that definitely is beyond what I know from the yoga and Ayurveda. So we know it experientially, where you're doing it a little bit, you know, your detail is what this group needs. So please, I will get in touch with USPA, and when I have the dates of the Vivekananda conference, we can take it to a whole other level. Because this Ayurveda, once you understand the space element and how earth and air and water and fire operate, there's no reason why we should have illness, okay? And it's pretty obvious to me why we don't talk about the space element and why it was taken out. You know, just like with Ayurveda being outlawed in India, you know, we have 1/3 of doctors in America now who have Indian blood. And within a couple of years' time, they have no choice but to learn how these elements operate. Because if you go to the Ayurveda conference, I mean, I literally walk two worlds, and it's just heartbreaking because others are curing stage 4 metastatic melanoma, pancreatic cancer. They have no fear of disease. And then we have others who, you know, can care less. All right. So literally, as I try to tell people now, Ayurveda is only for those who believe fire's hot and water's wet. Okay. That's all I'll say. And I'll send an invitation because we need to, I'm a bridge. So I need to help these children be the voice of the future.
What's
And
what
Thank
what's
you,
the
Marianne. Thank you, Marianne. We'll be in touch. Reach out to USPA, US Psychotronics at yahoo.com, and we'll coordinate sharing information and hope that we can get some of your people at our conference and ours at yours.
Yes. Thank you.
and I want to just add to that is that when I mentioned this is kind of like an archaeological find, is that maybe what we need to do is create a group, and there'll be different facets of it because it's the basic science of everything. So I'm not an expert in consciousness. I know some of the remote viewing. I know some of what's been done in that lane, but when it comes to medicine, that's way out of my league. But there are people who do. So what G has added, he's provided clarity that anybody can point to, and it's axiomatic. It's either right or it's not. And so it turns out that he can describe, not he, but what he's decoded describes so much of the phenomena. I mean, literally all the conundrums in physics go away. So there must be something there. So that's just a starting point. And just like the Vedic math, it took somebody a long time to really look at the Vedas, interpret them in a way that was authentic to get what the really, the 16 sutras are. And then it was just beautiful in terms of the power of it. And so the same with there's the military threads to the Vedas, there's the medicine threads. And so we all have knowledge. Our physics is not wrong. It's just not complete or right everywhere. So we need to bridge from this kind of point of clarity to things we know about and then make them better or more right or more acceptable for things that, science said didn't exist, but everybody knows they did, but you just couldn't explain it. Well, now there might be a chance to explain it. So maybe what we do is create a group or a set of groups or community online to kind of pull the thread on that and do their own decoding and start owning the ability to figure out this physics in terms of from their perspective. It's just a thought.
Dan, we have a question to you directly about what when did you start studying this, and what got you into it?
Yeah. So um, I started, I don't know, maybe 15, 20 years ago, and kind of a curious, critical thinker. And I was looking at some things, and some of it was, other sources like the Kabbalah and other letter numbers and decoding of Genesis using different tactics. And there was things in there that looked like physics. And I said, well, I never knew about those. And then I ran across G's work, and I think it was through a Nassim Harriman thread in Maya, where Maya means illusion, but in Vedic, the substratum is permanent and real, and what we call matter is the illusion. So that's where Maya fits in from uh, uh, an Indian perspective, Veda perspective. And so I started learning things, and I was curious about some of the early Tesla works and some of the inventions that they would get over unity power, electrical engineer. But I said, I wasn't taught this. There's whole missing pieces, in my education. And so I just started pulling the thread. And then I spent more time with G's work. And eventually it just turned out that, he's right again, right again. And something I didn't understand if I read it 3 or 4 times, he said it in plain English. I just, because of my training, I missed what he was telling me. And he was right at so many points. And there's so many things that adds up that I said, this can't be lost for another 32,000 years. We have to get it out there to more people. So I've been on a kind of doing a version of some of it's just to make sure I understand it, but be able to explain it in simpler terms, or more of a buildup that people can understand. And so when you read the paper, I have some of my interactions with G in their email interactions, and you can kind of get a feel for the touch points I had with him. He passed away a couple years ago, and his website's been taken down. So the paper points to all the archive.org links to all his information so that it's still available. And then what I'd like to do, as I said, create a kind of a training program, curriculum around it, and have a set of probably 4 books to go along with it so that people can just pick it up and learn it. I don't know if that answered the
What was your
question.
calling? How did that come to you?
Well, I think it was, like I said, just a curiosity that I started looking at some of these alternative views, the Kabbalah, and reading some of these interpretations of the Genesis that read letter numbers. They were decoded, they were encoded words,
Right.
and then they were physics based, and it was Genesis, but it was really talking about, quantum physics. And so
My dad has a couple of talks on in the members area that relates to his studies using the Kabbalah and the I Ching and number patterns that I think you'll find fascinating.
Yeah, and it's not the only one. I think in G says the Zoroaster, there's some similarities to it. So you had some knowledge that existed before the pre-flood, and then afterwards, and there's different pockets of it and different versions of it, and then a lot of mistranslations along the way. People uh, kind of capturing the science and using it for their own needs, and dumbing it down, and all kinds of things happen along the way. So it's very rare where you get a kind of the original or true interpretation. And so that's really what I think G has done a better job of that. And but it's there, and these peoples all over the world knew it somehow at some point. So I think it's a huge, like I said, it's probably the most fascinating, untold story that we need to get to the bottom of. And I think because I don't know, that's I mean, it's hard to answer that question of where it started, because it was just a number of different little things that didn't make sense, and I just kept pulling the thread, asking the questions.
Very good, very good. Two things that came up in response to some things we were talking about. Tom Brown again about the alias effect, where Foucault pendulum swings are deviated during an eclipse. I believe that one of our board members, Beverly Rubik, her and her husband did experiment during the eclipse that crossed from Oregon down through South Carolina a few years back. And they did a presentation for USPA based on that experiment. So it will be interesting to see the comparisons that way. We can look into that more, Tom Brown. Thank you. And Jeane Manning, who Toby mentioned, says her concern with AI engineers is that they could use info for your input that's more in control of humankind rather than more freedom. Our goal is a higher goal. Life equals affirming, not controlling. And I think, Dan, you touched on that same kind of reaching out for greater freedoms that we all desire here.
Yeah, and you know, I was in the AI business, and they're pretty advanced today, and there's huge limitations with, especially on the tactical, you know, version of them. But what I was encouraged to see is that there's people who have a conscience that are in that world. And the point that some of these guys are making is you're not going to be able to stop it. You have to understand it and make it work for you. And what it drives you to is kind of this imperative that's in the Declaration of Independence, or the theme of Sanatana Dharma, which is how to work with nature in harmony for the benefit of man. And how do you instill those values in AI? And so it's an open question, and it's a huge risk and danger that it's like playing with fire, and you're gonna blow yourself up, you shoot your eye out, and it's very likely. But to me, knowing what I know about the AI side, and then now about Dharma and this science, is that the remedy, just like it is for straightening uprighting the ship of America, is individuals, local communities, understanding what's going on, and exercising their unalienable rights. If you can't just, it's not just okay to say you have rights. You have to exercise them, because someone else will start thinking for you or doing for you if you don't let them. And this amplification factor of AI just made it that much worse. It accelerated the whole process. And we weren't very good at balancing, the power between self-governance and the government we contracted for. And so now we have to make up even more ground to get there. So I agree wholeheartedly with Jeane that mankind is way above the machine, but they're making machines, and mankind is being dumbed down, and there's a crossover point, and we got to be careful that we don't cross that.
So, for example, one of the threads here, our friend from England, Nick Franks, masterclass presenter, mentioned that he is submitting a paper to USPA. It may be in this newsletter that just came out this morning, about a radionic camera, and asked AI to put out the drawings for the construction of that. And Nick thought it was done very well. And so, with a limited perspective of asking it to accumulate data that's already there that you can then move on with, that could be a good use of it. Relying on it for everything that you are investigating may not necessarily be something that we should rely on wholeheartedly as a whole. We need to use it with our control, as opposed to it controlling us.
Hey, Scott.
Yeah, it has to be managed.
Yes. And then one other thing, Tom Brown mentioned that NASA had a page on the Foucault experiment during an eclipse, the alias effect, but it's been scrubbed from the website. So we'll put out a search for that information and go from there.
Yeah. Hey, Scott. I've got a request for another search for all the sleuths out there. Srinivasan had a son. I think his first name was Aditya. You can't really tell in the newspaper, but the son I'm told, immigrated to the United States and was involved in the venture capital tech sector in California. If anybody can find Srinivasan's son, or somebody knows somebody in India that can do some sleuthing, it would be interesting to find out what happened to the machine he built.
Awesome. We're going to print out the chat and we'll Toby, if you want to add that to the chat, we'll get a reminder that way for everybody to keep an eye out for that.
Will do.
There's a question, Scott, in there about the shape of space.
Yeah, I was just going to ask you that next.
Yeah, so what G is saying is that the simplest way is just to use a cube because it stacks, there's no gaps, and anything other shape that you wanted to pick, and there may be other ones that would work, but the cube is the simplest stacking one where you can get the net of effect in all the dimensions. And 3D is all we need. And when people talk about higher dimensions, what they're talking about is trying to get into this simultaneous patterns where the waveforms and everything is happening all the time, all together, interacting. And so it's not the physics of emptiness, it's the physics of fullness. And you have to look at it like that. And when you really see how everything outside, whatever geometry you want to pick a sphere, the reciprocal is happening inside when you take that interaction equation of the three gunas, the compression being inside, the bubble being the resonant piece, and then the outside being the expansion. It always has to balance. And so there's a Planck scale that you can carve up space into is a cubic space. But there's 18 orders smaller than that, so take the energy constant 10 to the 31st minus 34th for Planck's energy constant. Well, a mula prakriti is c squared below that. It's 18 orders below that. And so that's the hidden piece that science right now, you have to use logic to understand it. But the cubic form of the mula prakriti at that smallest one is the equivalent of the infinitesimal. So it doesn't go to 0, it goes to 10 to the minus 51, which is 1 over c to the 6th power. So that's
10 to the negative 51st is somewhere in the area of what they're estimating the mass of the neutrino to be.
Well, it's the rest mass of a photon. And a neutrino, 7 neutrinos equal the energy constant. So that's still 18 orders above. But we don't want to get too far in the weeds here.
No.
Those documents will walk you through it. The Boltzmann constant, all the constants are figured out in there, and there's some other ones that you probably haven't seen in G's paper, and so that's where I wrote a paper just to point people to the place they're interested in, because he was prolific, and if you go to his website, it just kind of very confusing, but so I tried to lay it out in a way where you can kind of read the story and then dive down where you need to. What you'll see is that you'll start to be able to discern people. There's some guys like Jack and others that are more on the money. Tom Bearden, for example, and his vacuum ideas. And so when you read Bearden and then you read Sankhya, you'll say, okay, that's it. So half the battle is just people talk past themselves because they use different terms and they mean the same thing, and they get all wrapped around the axle. And you just need to relax on that. Try to understand what the person's saying, and don't let the language interfere with your understanding.
Yeah, I think we've talked about having a master class where we debate that term scalar and scalar potential. Because again, I believe a lot of it is all based on different words that people like to cling to, which keeps us separated as opposed to bringing us together. And
very divisive, exactly.
Yes.
Here's the one I was looking for. The Chat GPT has a Vedic GPT. And so I hadn't crossed that. So there's a site called TAAFT. There's a AI for that. And there really is AI for anything. If I want to have my little Arduino do, microsecond level interrupts, it'll go code for you kind of thing. It's pretty cool. But the Sankhya one here, this is a case where it only knows what it's been told. And so what the words that are being used here and what you'll see, a lot of it is at a level that's already been polluted quite a bit from the original Sanskrit meaning. And so the tendency, whether it's a religious refrain or they anthropomorphize everything. And the original stuff was literally just pure science, but it does blend into the person as well, and the yoga piece of it. But the interpretations, and G has a long article about different translations, where he started from, the different sources, and so he doesn't hide anything. But and I'm an outsider. When I went to India, and there was monks and gurus, and everybody was there. They were all experts in it, and they had all the left and right limits, and what G is talking about is outside that, because they only know what they've been told, and it's a body of knowledge. And so part of the thing is you have to really, this is the quote from G saying, even a child can understand it, but an adult would have to give up their preconceived notions first. That's hard to do. That's easier said than done. I catch myself all the time, and I have the benefit of not being brought up with studying the Vedas and all the rituals. And so I didn't have that baggage when I started reading G stuff. I just had to up my game on physics a little bit. And so I could see the biases that were so prevalent in India. And so they're working on it. But there's impressive people that with credible knowledge, and they've been studying for years, but they wouldn't understand what G was saying because they translate everything into what they already know. And I think that's the same problem with the physicists who read this. It'll upset their world big time, and they won't like it. And that's talked about in the paper.
And the paper will be on our website. Toby has a corner, and we'll make sure that when we put our video of today out there, we'll have links to our other places where our members can obtain that. So please become a member if you're not. Dan, we thank you for being our newest member. Actually, somebody has joined since then. A couple people have, but we welcome you to the crowd. As my dad said, come on in. The water's fine. We're all looking for the connections, and we're delving into this cube of space that contains lots of information and help for the future. So looking forward to more discussions like this. And Toby, thank you for everything as well. And thank everybody for attending today. We had over 110 people in the room a few minutes ago, and we're getting to the end of our show. So thank you so much. Toby, any final comments? I know you always have something.
Yeah, I just wanted to thank Dan for all the work he's done. It's just incredible. It's just like
it is.
a whole new vista.
It is. So,
well, thank you for the invite. It's a great group, and I think we can get critical mass and actually make some progress here. So I'm looking forward to working with everyone.
and again, we have 2 other master classes in the books ready to go, or not on the books. Master Class 60 with Beverly Coleman, revisiting the butterfly Buddha, going to connect homeopathics and Bach flower remedies and subtle energies of all kinds. And Dr. Rick Leskowitz, his book, The Mystery of Life Energy, is a related factor there. And we have a few people online today who we're in discussion with to have other master classes in March, April, May. And we're looking forward to our back to our conference, yearly conference scenario in our 50th year that we're celebrating coming up shortly. So please mark your calendars and plan to attend. Okay, everybody, thank you so much. And thank you, Dan. Thank you, Toby. And thanks to everybody who's been here.